I want to say something before I begin. I've written a lot of reports, a lot of official summaries, incident logs, diplomatic incident memos, all that formal language where you strip the feeling out and leave only the facts. Clean sentences, no blood in them. This isn't one of those. What I'm about to tell you happened 14 months ago, and I still think about it most mornings. Not because it was the most violent thing I've ever witnessed, it wasn't. Not even close, but because of how it happened. The order of things, the way everyone was so certain and then so completely wrong. I think about the human. I think about how he stood there while she said those things to him, how he didn't move, didn't flinch. Didn't even look at her the way most beings would look at someone who was humiliating them in front of a crowd. He just stood there with his hands folded in front of him, and his eyes doing that thing that human eyes do. That thing where they're looking at you but also looking past you, calculating something you can't see. I didn't understand it then. I do now. The station. Velarin Station sits at the junction of 3 trade corridors, which means it's always loud and always crowded, and always slightly too warm because the environmental systems were installed 40 years ago, and nobody has ever properly updated them. The ceilings in the diplomatic quarter are high, 30 meters, maybe more, with those long observation windows that look out onto the docking ring, and the floors are polished black transit stone that was supposed to look impressive, but mostly just shows every scuff mark and spill. It is, in short, a place that tries very hard to seem grand, and mostly just seems tired. I had been stationed there for 11 months when the Vale delegation arrived. My job was translation support and junior coordination, which in practice meant I stood near people who were more important than me and handed them things and occasionally spoke so they didn't have to. It's not glamorous work, but you see everything from that position. People forget you're there. The Vale are, I should explain this for anyone reading this record who isn't familiar with galactic outer sector politics. The Vale are a species that has been wealthy for approximately 600 years without interruption. They come from a system with 4 habitable moons, abundant rare mineral deposits, and what their own historians describe as an almost embarrassing strategic position at the center of 2 ancient trade networks. What this means, practically, is that most Vale grow up in an environment where every problem they have ever encountered has been solved by either money or rank. Usually both. They are not a cruel species, exactly. They're not malicious. They just have a very firm understanding, built over generations, that the universe organizes itself around importance, and that the Vale are important. Lady Thesivin Orell was the most Vale person I had ever met. The delegation. She arrived on a Vale diplomatic transport, one of those long silver vessels that look like they were grown rather than built, all smooth curves and no visible seams. The kind of ship that makes the docking crew straighten up without being asked. I was there for the arrival briefing. My supervisor, coordinator Han, had gone through the delegation composition twice that morning and emphasized, with the particular emphasis she reserved for things she found personally irritating, that Lady Orell was to be treated as a first-tier dignitary at all times regardless of the unofficial nature of her visit. She's here to observe the trade renegotiations, Han said. Not to participate, but she will make everyone feel like she's in charge anyway, so let her. It's easier. She was right, I know that now. What Han hadn't mentioned, what I only saw for the first time when the transport's ramp descended and the delegation filed out, was the bodyguard. He came last. In most delegations, security personnel come first, or they flank the principal, or they position themselves strategically around the disembarkation zone. That's standard. That's how it works. But he came last, walking behind the 3 Vale aides and the 2 protocol officers and Lady Orell herself, and he walked with his hands at his sides, and his eyes moving in that slow, continuous arc that I would come to recognize across the docking bay, up to the observation balcony, along the catwalks, back to the crowd. Never stopping, never lingering, just measuring. He was human. I knew what humans were, obviously. Everyone in the diplomatic quarter knew what humans were by that point. They'd been galactic recognized for 60 years. They had 17 seats on the Outer Council. They had trade agreements with 43 species and a reputation for being. And this is a direct quote from a briefing document I had read the previous year, aggressively persistent in negotiations. but I had never been this close to one. He was shorter than I expected. A lot of beings expect humans to be large because of what you hear about them, but this one was not small exactly. Medium, maybe slightly above medium, built in a way that was difficult to immediately categorize, not the thick, obvious physicality of a Gret security officer, not the lean economy of a Sorath courier. Something in between that somehow suggested both. His skin was a warm brown. His hair was short, dark, cut very close to his skull. He wore a dark gray uniform with no insignia that I could see, and he moved with an economy that I can only describe as deliberate, like every step was a decision rather than just locomotion. His name, I would learn later, was Marcus Dale. I didn't know his name yet. At that moment he was just the human bodyguard, and Lady Aurel had already moved past him toward the greeting party, and he had already positioned himself slightly to her left and 3 steps back, and his eyes were already moving again. The first thing she said to HIM. The welcoming reception was held in the Velarin Station Grand Assembly Hall, which sounds more impressive than it is. It's a large room with a high ceiling and some decorative lighting, and a buffet table that always has those small Kelhari pastries that everyone pretends not to like, and then eats all of. I was there in my junior capacity, standing near the eastern wall with a data tablet and trying to look purposeful. Lady Aurel moved through the room the way very rich people move through rooms, not quickly, not slowly, but with a kind of gravitational inevitability, as though the room was slightly tilted toward her, and everyone was gradually sliding in her direction. She spoke with 3 senior trade delegates, 2 station administrators, and a Sorath cultural liaison, and in each conversation she was charming in precisely the way that makes you feel like the charm is a tool rather than an expression of genuine interest. Her human bodyguard stood nearby during each of these conversations, not so close as to intrude, not so far as to be out of reach, just present, watching. At some point during the 3rd conversation, Lady Aurel was speaking with Administrator Chelwyn about the station's new docking fee schedule, a topic she appeared to find genuinely interesting. A Gret delegate named Vorsh approached the bodyguard. Now the Gret, I should explain the Gret. The Gret are large, I mean that in every sense. Physically, they average about 2.5 meters and are built accordingly, broad, heavy, with a natural armored plating across their upper torsos that means most physical blows simply don't register. They are not the largest species in the galactic community, but they are probably the most obviously physical, and they have spent several centuries cultivating a reputation that matches their appearance. Vorsh was a large Gret. He was also, from what I gathered later, something of a social provocateur, the kind of being who tests the room constantly, who prods at things to see what moves. He stood next to the human bodyguard and looked at him the way you'd look at a piece of furniture that had been placed in an unexpected location. "You're her security," he said. Not rudely exactly, just with a particular flavor of disbelief. The human Marcus looked at him. "Yes." "A human?" "Yes." Vorsh made a sound that in Gret registers somewhere between amusement and dismissal. She must not be very worried about threats. Marcus didn't say anything. He went back to watching the room. Vorsh waited, apparently expecting some reaction, defensiveness, anger, some protest. When nothing came, he drifted away looking slightly dissatisfied. I watched this from across the room and wrote nothing about it in my notes. It seemed unremarkable. Security staff got this kind of thing all the time. You learn to ignore it or you don't last long in that work. What happened 20 minutes later was less easy to ignore. What she said. Lady Aurel had finished her conversation with Administrator Chelwyn and was moving toward the refreshment table, and she stopped. Just stopped mid-stride and turned and looked at Marcus. "You," she said. He looked at her. "My lady." "Come here." He stepped forward 2 paces. She looked at him, looked him over, in that way that certain high-status beings do, like a physical evaluation rather than a social exchange. "You're the one they assigned me," she said. "Yes, my lady." "I requested a Sorath protective detail." Her voice was level, not angry, just matter-of-fact in the way that someone states an obvious truth. "The agency sent a human." "I'm aware, my lady." "I find that," she paused, selecting the word with visible deliberateness, "inadequate." There were maybe 30 beings within hearing distance. I counted later when I was writing this down. 31, actually. And I watched every single one of them react to that word. Some looked away. Some adjusted their postures slightly. One of the veil aides made a small pained expression that was gone almost immediately. Marcus did nothing. I've made inquiries, Lady Orell continued. She said it almost pleasantly. Your species has been galactic recognized for what, 60 years? Barely a blink. You have no particular resilience adaptations, no specialized combat heritage. You're biologically unremarkable. She picked up a small glass of something pale and sparkling from the refreshment table. I don't say this to be cruel. I say it as a practical assessment. You are not the appropriate protective resource for a diplomatic mission of this sensitivity. 31 beings listening. The room had gotten quieter in that specific way rooms get quiet when something uncomfortable is happening. Not silent. But you could hear the ventilation system now. You could hear the distant sounds from the docking ring, sounds you hadn't noticed before. Marcus looked at her. His face was, I've tried to find the right word for this many times. Neutral isn't right. Neutral suggests emptiness. This was something more active than neutral. It was a face that was very deliberately showing nothing, which is different. I understand your concerns, my lady, he said. The agency believes I'm the appropriate assignment for this posting. If you'd like to file a formal reassignment request, I can assist you with that process. Lady Orell looked at him for a moment longer. I'll do that tomorrow, she said, and she walked away. I wrote it all down, every word. I don't know why. It wasn't my job to document that kind of exchange. But something about it, something about the way he stood there, the way his face was controlled in that particular way, made me want to have a record. I'm glad I did. What I noticed that nobody talked about. Here's what I want to say about the next 3 days, before I describe what happened on day 4. Marcus was always there. That sounds simple, but I mean it in a specific way. He was there in the way that the station walls were there, the way the floor was there. You stopped noticing him, and then something would draw your eye, and you'd find him, and you'd realize he had been there the whole time, positioned in a way you hadn't quite registered as strategic until you looked at it straight. The Grand Assembly Hall had 4 entrances. At any given social event, you would find Marcus placed such that he had sight lines to at least 3 of them. He never put himself with his back fully to a wall. He preferred corners and columns, positions where he could see in multiple directions simultaneously. I'm not a security specialist. I'm a junior diplomatic attaché. But I'd worked around security personnel for 11 months, and something about the way he moved through spaces felt different from the Gret guards or the Sarath details I was more familiar with. Less visible, maybe. Or not less visible, but differently visible. The Gret guards were visible because they were large and armored, and you couldn't avoid seeing them. Marcus was visible if you were looking for what he was doing rather than what he looked like. I started looking. On the second day, during the morning trade session, there was a minor incident. A Kelhari delegation aide had a physical altercation with a cargo handler near the secondary access corridor. Nothing serious. Raised voices, a shove, the kind of thing that happens on busy stations when schedules and stress combine. Station security responded in about 4 minutes. Marcus had repositioned before station security arrived. Not toward the altercation, away from it, to place himself between the altercation and Lady Orell. He did it so smoothly that I'm not sure anyone else noticed. He didn't make a production of it. He just moved and then was standing in a different place, and the different place happened to be directly between the noise and the dignitary. On the 3rd day, Lady Orell made another comment. This one was at the morning briefing, in front of the entire Veil delegation and several station officials. She was reviewing the security arrangements for the afternoon's scheduled tour of the station's new environmental systems. A long walk through several industrial sections, narrow corridors, low ceilings. The escort configuration concerns me, she said to the briefing room at large. We have a Gret station guard leading, 2 Veil personal aides, myself, and then... She gestured vaguely backward in the direction of the door where Marcus was standing. Whatever that is. Some polite diplomatic laughter, the uncomfortable kind that isn't really laughter, just sound. I'll note for the record, said Station Security Chief Andrel, a Sarath, professional, clearly uncomfortable, that Mr. Dale comes with the highest available clearance rating from the Protective Services Agency. Clearance ratings, Lady Orel said pleasantly. Measure bureaucratic approval, not capability. She left it there, she didn't press it. She moved on to the next agenda item. Marcus stood at the door and watched the room. I watched him watch the room and I thought, why doesn't he say something? I thought about that a lot over those 3 days. He was, as far as I could tell, a composed and capable professional. He didn't seem bothered exactly, but he also didn't seem like he'd simply failed to notice what was happening. There was something else going on behind those measured eyes, some ongoing calculation, and I didn't know what it was measuring. I found out on day 4. The afternoon tour. The Environmental Systems Tour was scheduled for the 14th hour. 6 members of the Vale delegation, Lady Orel, the station's chief environmental engineer, a Kelhari named Yas who was extremely enthusiastic about air filtration systems, and a small security escort. I was there because Coordinator Han had decided that having translation support present during the tour was appropriate given that Yas spoke primarily in technical Kelhari dialect that not everyone could follow. The route took us through the main public areas first, the observation galleries, the trade floor level, the food distribution hub, and then down through a series of maintenance access corridors toward the environmental core. These corridors I should paint the picture for you. They're not designed for delegation tour. They're designed for maintenance crews. Low ceilings about 2.5 meters, walls covered in conduit and pipe casing, emergency lighting in strips along the floor rather than overhead panels. The air has a slightly metallic quality down there, like breathing near machinery. The Gret station guard, his name was Toven, I knew him slightly, had to duck in the lower sections. He did it without comment, but you could see the discomfort. His armor plating scraped the ceiling at one point and left a pale mark on the conduit casing. Marcus moved through the same corridors as though he'd been built for them. That's not quite right, let me try again. He didn't seem particularly comfortable or uncomfortable. He just moved. The ceiling height didn't seem to require any adjustment from him. The cramped width didn't seem to narrow his awareness. He kept his hands loose at his sides, his eyes continuing their long, slow arc. If anything, I noticed him relax slightly as we went deeper. The same way certain people relax in small, enclosed spaces, where there are fewer variables, fewer directions to monitor. The problem started about 40 minutes into the tour. What happened in the lower corridor? The environmental core access is reached through what Yas called the integration corridor, a long, slightly curved passage about 8 meters wide and 200 meters long, with the main environmental processing units on one side and a series of heavy blast doors on the other. The blast doors are part of the station's emergency compartmentalization system. They're designed to seal sections of the station in the event of pressure loss, fire, or structural breach. Big, heavy, automated, you see them throughout stations of this class, and they're the kind of thing you stop noticing after a while. We were approximately 60 meters into the integration corridor when the alert went off. Not a major alarm. The station has multiple alert tiers, and this was Tier 3, I think. The overhead strips went from white to amber. An automated voice announced a pressure anomaly in Section 7C, which was not our section, and advised non-essential personnel to move to the nearest assembly point. Yas stopped, checked his technical pad. The anomaly is isolated to 7C, he said. We're in 9B, this shouldn't affect. The first blast door came down. Behind us, about 20 meters behind the end of our group. It came down fast. These things are designed to seal in seconds, and the sound it made was enormous in the enclosed space. A deep metallic boom that felt more than heard, like something in your chest shifting. Everyone stopped moving. Then the second blast door came down. Ahead of us, 30 meters in front. We were now in a sealed section of the integration corridor. Behind us, locked. Ahead, locked. The amber lighting was making everyone look slightly ill. The automated voice continued its calm announcement about the 7C pressure anomaly, which was happening somewhere that was not here, which was extremely unhelpful. I counted our group, 7 Vale delegation members including Lady Orel, me, Yas, Toven the Gret guard. And Marcus. Lady Orel's voice was sharp and controlled. What is this? Emergency compartmentalization, Yas said. He was already at a wall panel. The pressure anomaly triggered automated sealing protocols. I can override from here, it'll take. He paused, tapped the panel, tapped it again. The override is not responding. What does that mean? It means the panel isn't communicating with the central system. The anomaly may have affected the local network nodes. He looked, for the first time, genuinely worried. I need to contact station control directly. He pulled out a communication device, looked at it longer than was comfortable. The signal is degraded, Marcus said. He was looking at his own device. Local interference. The compartmentalization ceiling creates electromagnetic noise in enclosed sections. Standard protocol. He wasn't saying this to reassure anyone. He was just reporting. How long for manual override? Yas blinked. If I can access the maintenance panel at the far end. He gestured ahead, toward the sealed blast door that was now 30 meters in front of us. There's a hardwired override, but it requires the emergency access code. Do you have it? Yes, it's in my system, but the panel is behind the second blast door. Marcus nodded, looked at the second blast door, looked back at the corridor. His eyes did that long arc one more time, ceiling, walls, floor, the pipes, the conduit, the emergency lighting strips. There, he said. He pointed upward and to the left. Up near the ceiling, maybe 2.5 meters up, there was a maintenance access panel, small, about 1/2 meter square. The kind of thing you don't notice because it's up near the ceiling, and painted the same color as the wall, and designed to not draw attention. Emergency maintenance bypass, Marcus said. Should connect to the hardwired system on the other side of the blast door. If I can access it and you can give me the code. He looked at Yas. Yas stared at the panel. Yes, that should work, but it's, he measured the height. It's at least 2.5 meters we'd need. He looked at Tovin. Tovin straightened. He was Gret, approximately 2.4 meters tall with the armor plating adding a few centimeters. He could potentially reach the panel if he... I can reach it, Marcus said. Everyone looked at him. He was the shortest being in the group, by a significant margin. The pipe casing along the left wall, Marcus said. He was already walking toward it. Goes up in 3 stages. Gives me footing at about 40 centimeters, then 1.5 meters, then I can bridge to the ceiling mount at... He was looking at the geometry the way I imagine an engineer looks at a problem. 2.3 meters, near enough. Lady Aurel made a sound. I'm not sure how to transcribe it, something between disbelief and contempt. You're going to climb the wall. Yes, my lady. We have a Gret security officer standing right there. Tovin's armor plating makes it difficult to navigate the pipe casing without dislodging the conduit. The mounting isn't rated for that load. He said it without any particular inflection, like he was reading a technical specification. I'll be faster. She stared at him. The amber light made her expression harder to read than usual, but I was watching and I thought I saw something move across her face. Something quick and complicated that she smoothed away before it settled into anything visible. This is absurd, she said almost to herself. Marcus had already put his hand on the first pipe mount. The climb. I want to try to describe what this looked like. I know that sounds simple, a person climbing a wall, but there was something about it that I've thought about repeatedly since. The pipe casing along the wall was not designed to be climbed. It's an array of conduits, different diameters, different materials, mounted at various depths from the wall surface on metal brackets. Some of them were hot. I learned that later. There were thermal pipes in that section running to the environmental units, and they operate at elevated temperatures. Marcus grabbed the first mounting bracket with his right hand, put his boot on a conduit about 40 centimeters up, and pushed. He went up fast, not superhuman fast. I want to be careful here because what I'm describing isn't some impossible feat. It's a 2.5 meter wall, but he moved with a kind of efficiency that I've never seen replicated. No wasted motion, no hesitation at each hold. It was as though the route was already mapped and the body was just executing a plan that the mind had already completed. When his hand touched a hot pipe, I heard the hiss of contact, that involuntary sharp sound that heat makes against skin. He didn't pull back. He shifted his grip to a different hold without breaking rhythm, barely paused, kept going. I looked at Lady Aurel. She was watching. Her face had changed again, that complicated expression, back and stronger, less smoothed away. He reached the maintenance panel in about 12 seconds. He braced against the ceiling mount, his body at an angle, weight distributed across 3 contact points, and got the panel open with one hand. "Code," he said. Yas read it out, a long alphanumeric sequence. Marcus entered it one-handed into the panel's emergency interface. There was a pause that felt much longer than it probably was. Then the blast door in front of us began to rise. The one behind us followed about 4 seconds later. The amber lighting shifted back toward white. The automated voice changed its announcement. The Section 7C anomaly was being addressed. Normal operations would resume shortly. Marcus came back down the wall the same way he'd gone up, put his feet on the floor, shook his right hand once, just once at his side, the involuntary response to the burn, and then folded both hands in front of him and looked at Lady Orel. "The corridor is clear, my lady. We can proceed or return your preference." The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Yas broke it first. "That was, I want to note for the maintenance record that the emergency bypass was accessed and utilized correctly, and I'll be recommending a panel relocation in my report." He was already typing. He always typed when he was nervous. Tovin said nothing, but he was looking at Marcus with an expression that I recognized, the look that very large beings get when they've observed something they didn't expect. Recalibration. Lady Orel said, "We'll return to the main level." She turned and walked toward the now open blast door behind us. She didn't say anything to Marcus. She didn't acknowledge what he'd done. She just walked. And he fell into his position, left, 3 steps back, and walked with her. I wrote everything down, every detail. I wrote about the pipe casing and the thermal burn and the 12 seconds and the way he shook his hand once and then stopped shaking it. I wrote it all down because I didn't understand yet why it mattered, but I knew it did. I was just starting to understand what I was looking at. That evening, the station's diplomatic staff had a quarterly social gathering that evening, informal. A meeting room turned into a lounge, drinks and conversation, and a lot of venting about whatever the most recent difficult delegation had been like. I usually went because Han expected everyone to maintain collegial relationships, and also because the drinks were provided rather than paid for, which on a junior attache's salary matters. I was standing near the window, the one that looks out at the docking ring, when Tovin came to stand next to me. This was unusual. Tovin was Gret Station Security, I was Vale Diplomatic Corps. We knew each other by name and by sight, but we didn't usually socialize. He looked out at the docking ring for a moment. "The human," he said. "Yes." His hand, the burn. I nodded. I'd noticed. "In the medical bay," Tovin said. "I checked, for the record." He paused. "Degree thermal contact across 4 centimeters of the right palm. He went there after the delegation returned to the guest quarters. He was in and out in under 15 minutes. I processed that. A burn of that severity, degree, would normally require at least an hour of treatment. Pain management, wound care, regenerative protocols. "Under 15 minutes," I said. "In and out." Tovin was quiet for another moment. And then he went back to his post outside Lady Orel's quarters, stood there for the next 3 hours. I looked out at the docking ring. A large cargo hauler was decoupling from the secondary berth, its running lights blinking in the dark. "She doesn't know?" I asked. "She doesn't know," Tovin said. "She went to her quarters. She hasn't asked." We stood there for a moment. "There's a briefing," Tovin said. "Not public, security classification. I shouldn't be telling you." He paused. "The Protective Services Agency file on Marcus Dale. I pulled it this afternoon after the corridor." I looked at him. "I can't share the classification details," he said, "but I'll tell you what the unclassified portion says." He turned and looked directly at me for the first time. "He's from Earth. Origin region, a place called the Pacific Northwest. Secondary training, a place called Appalachia. Before the agency, he served in a unit that I can't name because even its designation is classified." He paused. "The unclassified portion has 2 pages. The file is 47 pages long." I did the math. 45 pages classified, I said. 45 pages classified, Tovin confirmed, for a biologically unremarkable species. He finished his drink, nodded at me once, and walked away. I stood at the window and looked out at the docking ring and thought about hands that don't stop moving even when they're burned. Day 4 morning. I want to tell you about the morning before everything happened, because I think it matters. I arrived early at the diplomatic level. I had reports to file before the day's sessions began, and the corridors were quiet. The morning maintenance crew was finishing their rounds, and the air was slightly cooler than usual because someone had finally complained about the temperature, and the environmental team had overcorrected. I turned the corner of the east wing and found Marcus. He was standing in the small alcove near the junction of the east and north corridors, the one with the window that looks out toward the station's outer hull, the structural supports, the distant planet below. He had a small container of something hot, coffee, I think, which is a human thing, and he was standing completely still, looking out. Not watching the room, not doing the arc, just looking out at the planet. I almost walked past without speaking, then I stopped. "Mr. Dale," I said. He turned, looked at me with a slight adjustment of expression, recognition, some version of greeting. "Attaché Veth. How's your hand?" He looked down at his right hand. The burn area was covered with a medical seal, thin, transparent, you'd miss it if you weren't looking. "Fine," he said. "Thank you for asking." There was a pause. I don't entirely know why I said what I said next. It wasn't professionally appropriate. But 11 months on a station will wear down certain kinds of appropriateness. "She's going to file that reassignment request today," I said. "I heard this morning that she asked for the forms." He nodded. He already knew. "Does that bother you?" I asked. He thought about this. I got the sense he was actually thinking about it rather than preparing a polite non-answer. "No," he said. "No. She's entitled to request a different protective resource. That's her right." He looked back out the window. "And she's not wrong that humans are not the most physically imposing option. If I were assembling a protective detail based on obvious threat deterrence, I wouldn't put humans at the top of the list either." I thought about what Tovin had told me, 45 classified pages. "But," I said. He glanced at me. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something that acknowledged the presence of a but without fully occupying it. "Deterrence is one function," he said. "One." He looked back out at the planet. The conversation ended without either of us formally ending it, which is sometimes how conversations end when both parties understand each other. I went to file my reports. 3 hours later, everything changed. The arrivals. I need to set up what happened next carefully, because the sequence of events matters and I don't want to get it wrong. At the 11th hour of the day, 3 ships arrived at Velarin Station's outer docking approach. They were logged by traffic control as a Harathi commercial convoy, standard classification, nothing flagged, 2 mid-range cargo haulers and a smaller escort vessel. Harathi ships at Velarin were common. The Harathi are a trading species, gregarious, with routes through 6 sectors. Nobody looked twice. What the initial scan didn't flag, and this was a failure of the scanning array that would later result in significant equipment review, was that the escort vessel's registration was 3 years out of date, and the cargo manifests on the haulers didn't match their actual cargo. At the 12th hour, Lady Aurel was in the station's secondary conference suite for a private consultation with 2 of the Vale trade delegates. The room had 1 main entrance, 2 emergency exits, and a service corridor that connected to the kitchen facilities. It was on the 4th level of the diplomatic quarter. At the 12th hour and approximately 18 minutes, 4 beings in Harathi commercial worker coveralls were observed by camera moving through the station's commercial district, which was normal. 4 minutes later, they had moved off camera in a direction that would later be identified as toward the service lifts that accessed the 4th level. Station security wasn't alerted yet. The cameras in that section weren't being actively monitored. They fed into the logging system, but with 48 camera banks running simultaneously, active monitoring was selective. Marcus was outside the conference suite, standing, looking at the corridor. At the 12th hour and 24 minutes, I walked past that corridor on my way to the document archive on the 4th level. I saw him. I almost nodded and kept walking. He wasn't doing the arc. He was completely still, facing down the south corridor, the one that connected to the service access junction, and his hands were no longer folded in front of him. They were at his sides, and his face had changed. I don't have good language for what I saw in his face in that moment. It wasn't fear. It wasn't aggression. It was something much quieter and much more dangerous than either of those, and I have thought about it many times since, and the closest I can come is this. It was the face of something that has been patient for a very long time, and has just decided to stop being patient. I stopped walking. He looked at me. "Get to the document archive," he said. "Lock the door from inside. Don't come out until station security gives the all clear." His voice was completely level. No drama, no urgency that would cause panic, just information delivery. "What?" I started. "Please," he said. I went. What I heard from the archive. I want to be honest about something. I didn't see most of what happened next. I was in the locked archive behind a sealed door following instructions. What I'm about to tell you comes from 3 sources. The security camera footage that was reviewed in the post-incident investigation, the station incident report that I subsequently accessed as part of the diplomatic record, and the accounts of 2 people who were there. The 4 beings in Harathi commercial coveralls entered the South Service corridor at the 12th hour and 26 minutes. They were carrying equipment described in the report as directed personnel incapacitation devices, a category that in galactic law sits in a gray zone between weapons and security equipment, which is how they'd gotten them through the initial screening. They were professional. Their movements were coordinated. Their positions as they approached the conference suite were correct for a forced entry scenario. 1 on the door, 1 on each emergency exit, 1 covering the approach corridor. Marcus was in the approach corridor. The camera footage shows him standing there when the 4th being, the one covering the corridor, turned the corner and saw him. There's a moment, visible on camera, where the 4th being stops, assesses, clearly recalibrates the threat level downward. He's looking at a medium-height human in a dark uniform with no visible weapons. He raises his incapacitation device. What happens next takes 4.7 seconds. I've been told this by the investigator who reviewed the footage. 4.7 seconds of camera time. I'm not going to describe it in precise detail, because I'm not a security specialist, and I don't want to get the terminology wrong, and I think the precise mechanics matter less than the outcome. The outcome was 1 being rendered incapacitated in the corridor, Marcus moving through the conference suite doorway. 2 sounds that the acoustic log describes as impact events. The 3rd incapacitation in the south emergency exit alcove, which based on the footage means Marcus covered approximately 12 meters between the 2nd and 3rd events. 11 seconds total from corridor entry to all 4 beings incapacitated. 4 beings, 1 human, 11 seconds. The conference suite door opened. Lady Orell's voice, sharp, controlled, asked what was happening. Marcus's voice, completely level, explained that there had been a security incident. Station security had been alerted, and she should remain in the suite until they arrived. Station security arrived at the 12th hour and 32 minutes. 6 minutes after Marcus had begun the corridor, 8 minutes after I'd locked myself in the archive. What happened after? The next few hours were what you'd expect after a security incident on a diplomatic station. Controlled chaos. A lot of official movement. Coordinator Han appearing and immediately beginning to generate reports. The Veil delegation circling around Lady Orell in a protective cluster that hadn't been there before. I came out of the archive when station security cleared the level. I filed a witness report. I gave it in detail because I'd learned that details matter. The Harathi commercial vessel attempted to undock at the 12:50 mark and was held by station traffic control, standard protocol when an incident is under investigation. The beings in the coveralls were Harathi nationals, but connected to a political faction that was, the report used the word opposed, to Lady Orell's trade negotiating position. The details of the politics were above my clearance level and are still, to my knowledge, partially classified. Marcus was in the medical bay for about 20 minutes after station security arrived. He came out and went back to his post. Lady Orell saw him from across the corridor. She was being briefed by Han on the security situation. She looked at him, really looked at him, and then she looked away and continued listening to the briefing. I watched this happen. I was 8 meters away, standing against the wall with my data tablet, being my usual invisible junior attaché self. Han finished the briefing. The Veil delegation aides began organizing the movement back to the guest quarters. Tighter formation this time. nobody pretending the earlier looseness was appropriate. Lady Aurel didn't move with them immediately. She stood in the corridor, looking at something I couldn't see from where I was, or maybe not looking at anything specific, just standing. Then she walked to Marcus. He was positioned near the lift, watching the corridor. He looked at her when she approached. She stood in front of him. The corridor was busy security personnel, her aides, Han with her data tablet, 3 station officials. 30, 40 beings moving around them. She said something to him, quietly. I couldn't hear it from where I was standing. He said something back, also quietly. She stood there for another moment. Her face was doing something complicated that I couldn't quite read from the angle, something that might have been difficult for a species as accustomed to certainty as the veil. Then she nodded, once turned, walked toward the guest quarters. Marcus fell into his position, left, 3 steps back. I looked at my data tablet, looked back at them walking down the corridor. I went and found Tovin that evening and asked him if he knew what she'd said. Tovin didn't know, but he'd been close enough to hear the first part of what Marcus had said back. He said, "It's my job, my lady." The part I've thought about the most. 3 days after the incident, Lady Aurel formally withdrew her reassignment request. No announcement, no statement. The forms were withdrawn through the administrative system at the 7th hour of the morning. I only know about it because part of my job involved monitoring administrative filings. I sat with that for a while. There's something I've thought about ever since, something about the gap between what we think we understand and what we actually understand. Lady Aurel had looked at Marcus and seen every category that her experience and her cultural context had prepared her to use. Species, physical parameters, biological assessment, diplomatic weight. She had applied those categories accurately by her own framework. She had been completely wrong. Not because the categories were incorrect in themselves. Not because humans aren't, as she said, the most physically imposing species in the galactic community. They're not. That's true. The Gret are larger. The Sorath are faster. There are species with natural armoring, natural toxins, natural threat indicators that make a galactic protective detail look immediately credible. But Lady Aurel's categories didn't have a slot for what Marcus was. And I think that's the thing that I keep returning to. Not the 11 seconds, not the burned hand that went back to post without complaint, not the 45 classified pages. It's the absence of the slot. Because what Marcus Dale was, what humans are, I've come to understand, in a way that I don't think most of the galactic community has really processed yet, is not well described by any of the standard measurement categories. Physical parameters, biological assessment, threat presence, these things measure what a being is. But there's something else. Something about what a being becomes when the circumstances require it. Something about persistence and adaptation, and a particular quality of, I keep coming back to the word stubbornness, but that's not quite right. Humans come from a world that, by galactic environmental classification standards, is a Category 4 Deathworld. That means high gravity relative to galactic average, extreme temperature variance, significant predator ecosystem pressure, biological pathogen load in the upper percentiles, geological and meteorological instability factors that would cause most species to classify the environment as non-viable for long-term habitation. Humans have been on that world for approximately 300,000 years, and the planet has not yet managed to kill all of them. That's not a category, that's a history. And the history is in the body, in the reflexes, in the part of the brain that calculates 12 seconds of wall climbing before the conscious mind has finished framing the question. It's in the part that says the route is already mapped, execute the plan. I don't know if Lady Aurel understood all of this. I don't know how much of it she knew before the incident and how much of it she learned after. But I know that she withdrew the reassignment request. And I know that for the remaining 6 days of the delegation's visit, she never said another word about biologically unremarkable. And I know that Marcus stood at his post, left, 3 steps back, with his burned hand folded in front of him and his eyes doing their long, slow, continuous arc. And he never said anything about any of it either.